as it's been unfolding, it hasn't been looking exactly like a GNU. It's been looking like a coalition. The United States of America has nothing to do with what bills we sign. Are we truly independent as African nation? It's not just the land that we don't own. We don't own everything that's under the land. Poverty in South Africa is man-made.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. And today I'm really excited to be joined by a friend of the show. She's an author, an activist, a law student, and someone who has captured the imagination of South Africa from the age of 13. Zulaikha Patel, you join an illustrious club of people who have been on SMWX 3 times.
I'm back. I'm back. I think I'm a family member of the podcast at this
You basically
point.
are.
Yeah. I'll probably be back again next year.
We always have time for you, and you're doing great things, and I'm looking forward to discussing them. One of the things we've been doing in our conversations is looking at the political situation in South Africa. How do you look back on and interpret the 2024 election?
The 2024 election was predictable. What happened was actually predictable. And if I think you go a few episodes back, there was someone you spoke to in your very first few episodes where you actually did point this out, that it's going to happen at some point. So the governing party losing its majority, that was bound to happen, especially at such a pivotal point in our democracy. 30 years into democracy, 30 years of what exactly in our democracy? Because people are still living in extreme poverty, and poverty has a face in our country. That face is black, and people are still living under the very same conditions in the township, in the rural areas that they lived under during apartheid. So the remnants of the apartheid system are still deeply attached to our society. And also, when you look at the destruction as well over the years of our democracy that has also been caused as a result of corruption, as a result of cadre deployment, as a result of, I don't know who played chess with who in prison before 94. Now you owe that person a position. If you look at the destruction that has been caused by that, it's really, truly difficult to turn a blind eye to it. So people were bound to get tired at some point. And I think that last year's outcome definitely changes the trajectory of where South Africa is headed, because I think as much as there's attempts to recover, I don't think that we're going to go back to the governing party having the majority. What was done last year, I think, has totally changed South Africa's political landscape completely. And we're only going to see a greater impact of that and see it unfold over the years. And in terms of a GNU, I am not too sure about that, actually. I am not too sure about that. If I was the president, I don't think I would have gone with that decision. I would have listened to what the people are saying on the ground in terms of who is the majority we are trying to serve, in terms of we're trying to answer their needs. Who are the majority that are in dire living conditions, right? That initially also took you out of having the majority. So I would have looked to actually answering the call of anything you do in terms of a decision should be in line with serving and answering the needs of the Black majority in this country. So parties that are aligned with the needs of the Black majority, land, eradicating poverty, structural poverty, because poverty in South Africa is man-made, right? Eradicating that, land, answering those critical needs, I would have aligned myself with parties that actually have that at their core, and I would have aligned myself there. But that's just me, right? So I wouldn't have necessarily gone with the GNU, because as it's been unfolding, it hasn't been looking exactly like a GNU. It's been looking like a coalition between the governing party and the other sort of right-winged party that we all know, right? And in terms of what's been expected, it's almost like there's something in hidden conversations that we don't know about per se, where it's not looking very GNU-y. It's looking very coalition between two parties, the official opposition party and the governing party. So I wouldn't have gone with that decision, but I think now that we're seeing it unfold and we're seeing what's happening with our country in terms of our diplomatic relations, in terms of our stance on Palestine, in terms of the bills that are being signed, the Bella Bill, the uproar that the Bella Bill has caused, our state of affairs with the US, Rwanda. One can only imagine what the next election is going to be like.
It's going to be something. I mean, we've got a local one coming up probably end of next year. And it's going to be fascinating to see. You mentioned the foreign policy situation. And of course, I think that has really caused a great deal of confusion, anger, frustration. What do you make of that? The Afriforums of this world going to the US and this whole narrative of white persecution that seems to have taken its grip in certain marginal sectors of our society, but that have a very loud voice.
Firstly, I have to go back to the point that it's important for Black writers to exist and thrive, because it's important for us to document our history. This is what happens when we do not document our history, because our history is not even as old as black and white pictures. There are color pictures that aren't even extremely pixelated of what was done, the brutality under the apartheid regime, the brutality of poverty post the apartheid regime, right? So this is why it's very important to document that, because then it's easy for those that are in control of the narrative to change the narrative and now tell the world that there's a white persecution or white genocide in South Africa. How does that happen when people who look like us, the Black majority, we don't have land, and more than 70% of the land is not even owned by the state itself. It's privately owned. And privately owned in this country, anything that's privatized in South Africa has a face and it's white. Anything that's privatized in South Africa has a face which is white. So this is the danger of us not documenting our history and documenting the reality that we live in currently. People are subjected to poverty in this country, and it's brutal. It's brutal. And people have lost lives. Black people have lost lives through this democracy as a result of the remnants of the apartheid system, the Marikana miners. This is what happens when we do not document that and let the world know, right? This is what happens. But beyond ensuring that we document the reality of what we live through, I think that it then also goes back to, at the end of the day, South Africa is a sovereign state and it's a sovereign republic. The United States of America has nothing to do with what bills we sign, what we decide to do, the decisions that a sovereign government that is not dependent on any nation, it's got nothing to do with any of our decisions. Whether we decide tomorrow that, hey, a huge chunk of Stellenbosch is going to be redistributed, the United States has no say in that because we are a sovereign nation. And so it goes back to the question of our independence. Are we truly independent as African nations, and particularly nations such as South Africa and Namibia that still have issues of land, issues of a heavy white presence in the economy and structural poverty as well? Are we really sovereign, independent nations? Because it's going back to the question of imperialism and neocolonialism. Because had we been truly sovereign states, there would not be any nation feeling like it can poke a finger in what we decide to do.
Absolutely. And this narrative of white persecution and this idea that white South Africans, who are in many ways statistically proven, historically proven to be in positions of economic privilege, power, historical privilege, are somehow victims in this society. They are victims in this society, but white
Victims
South Africans
in what sense?
Exactly. I wouldn't look at white South Africans and think these are the prime victims of South African society when I look at this country, and yet that's the narrative that's being peddled.
And no, there's no such thing as victims. And what I need white South Africans to also understand, life may be hard. Yes, the economy is tough. VAT was increased and it's being increased incrementally. Life is hard, but your circumstances of having a hard life have got nothing to do with any system, former policies, previous laws. They've got everything to do with just you. That's it. Life being hard for you has got nothing to do with history or anything. So it doesn't necessarily make you a victim. Life being hard, in the case of Tsepo's life being hard has got everything to do with the fact that Tsepo, who lives in Soweto, who's having a hard life, who has no access to opportunities, he was structurally placed in a township. There's nothing positive about the township structure. It was meant to destroy and make Black people feel inferior. It was created to separate us from opportunity and structurally keep us in a perpetual cycle of poverty. Because once you're in it, it's very hard to get out of a perpetual cycle of poverty. So now back to Tsepo. Tsepo's life being hard has everything to do with the then apartheid system that still has remnants attached to our country now. Tsepo living in a 4-room has got everything to do with those policies, because Tsepo has been stuck in a perpetual cycle of poverty. Now, Mariki's life being hard has got nothing to do with any system, right? And so I need white people to understand, when we say you have white privilege, right? We're not saying you didn't have to work hard or there were no obstacles in your journey.
Or that life is perfect
right?
for you.
Or your life is perfect. What we're saying is you're not stuck in systemic obstacles. That's what we're saying. So I don't think white people are victims. It's not possible for a minority of individuals that have been statistically proven. The facts are there. The facts exist. Even if the US wants to look up the facts exist.
They're there.
Right? You don't even need to Google the facts. Come to South Africa, fly in via Cape Town International Airport and drive out. You're done. Look at the left side of the window and look at the right side of the window. You are done. There's the statistics being proven. So I don't think a minority of individuals that have been statistically proven to be in a better place economically, to have more ownership of land, more opportunities, and have a life that will never really keep them in a perpetual cycle of poverty are victims, unfortunately.
You mentioned a really important point about independence. And I feel like we haven't spoken enough about that word. Like, we've spoken about economic freedom in terms of individuals in society, but not enough about the independence of African states themselves and the extent to which maybe a goal of future generations needs to be, it's not just about economic growth and resolving inequality, unemployment, and poverty. It's about getting our economies to the point where we no longer need to rely on former colonial economies to tell us what to do. Because now we see that we're in this invidious position where if a bad administration arises in one of these countries, they actually still think they can tell us what to do. And that's not independence.
No, that's not independence. And I don't think people understand how deep the issue of land is. Because remember, it's not just the land that we don't own. We don't own everything that's under the land. That means we are stuck in a cycle of we don't even own the very thing that we could back our currencies with to actually get to a point where, because with money comes independence. There's no doubt about that. With capital, with a thriving currency comes independence. And with access to capital comes independence. And so we don't own what's underground, what we should actually be backing our currencies with, right? We don't own that. And that is why you see genocides such as the one in Congo take place, because we don't own what's underneath the land. And for as long as we don't own what's underneath the land and the land itself, surface and underground, we will consistently have other role players control what happens and stick their fingers to get a slice of the pie, a huge slice of the pie, and leave us with the crumbs. And we consistently have to fight for that. And also, with African nations from time to time having a bad administration, has anyone ever thought of our administrations are actually put in a position where it's very hard for them to be successful administrations? They're actually, in a way, and this is not me making excuses for corruption, but the way the system is designed, they're set up to actually fail so that they can get loans, and consistently we find ourselves in debt. And we find ourselves in the cycle where when we're in debt, we have no control. Really, we have no control. And for as long as we have no control, we also can't even intervene in what happens across the border.
I want to turn attention to your life because we've also had a set of conversations around your writing and your goals. You have published My Coily Crowny Hair, your first children's book, and today I'm proud to announce that you have now published your second book, Brave Like Me. And firstly, what inspired you to write books for children, who's someone who's also at a relatively young age in their life? I find that quite rare, actually.
So I knew from a very young age that I was going to get involved in some form of professional writing. I may have not envisioned myself as an author, but I knew I would do some form of professional writing because I was a bookworm as a child. I was a nerd. I always excelled in anything that was theory related, right? I always excelled in that as a child. So it was bound to happen. And when my activism started, I knew the day I write books, I'm going to write books for children, because it's very important that if we're looking at a world that requires young people to be change makers and young people to come to the forefront in being involved in either democratic processes and being involved in the politics of a country, then we need to start them off from the time they're children. The material needs to change radically so. Children need to see themselves in the books, to have their identity and existence empowered. And also, they need to be taught certain concepts from an early age, like how to use their voices, how to be brave, because we're not going to get to a state of having young people that are brave, radical about changing the world and changing the state of the country if we don't have children who are reading material that empowers them to use their voices. So I knew I'm going to write basically love letters for children to empower them.
And My Coily Crowny Hair was a lot about, if you look at the themes that run through the book, self-care, self-love, something that has been taken away from particularly Black children. Why was that theme important for you to focus on?
So the idea was, when I knew I want to write children's literature, the idea was, step one, focus on empowering them and their existence and how they look, and teach them about self-love, teach them about the concept of pouring into oneself in order to actually positively have a positive output into the world, right? And empower them, empower their existence. Then step 2 was now, okay, now that they're confident about who they are and they think they're great, beautiful, which they are, then step 2 was now focus on their voices. Let's get them to be confident. Let's get them to use their voices. Let's get them to understand the power of their voices. So it was a whole step-by-step idea.
Wow. And Brave Like Me, what was the inspiration behind this new book?
So I don't want to say I was pressured, but everybody after my first book came to me in numbers and said, are we getting a sequel? What's happening with you, girl? Like, are you writing another book? Can't be a one-time unicorn, girl. We need more. And I appreciate that pressure because that's what kept me on my toes to not actually slack and not bring out another book.
Sure.
It kept me on my toes and I appreciate that. So when I was already thinking, okay, time's ticking now. Everyone's asking for a second book. What am I going to write about? And then I went back to that idea of let's actually teach children about the power of their voices. Let's teach them to use their voices. Let's teach them about activism. I was like, let me write a story that is styled like a memoir, actually using my story, but not using my story in terms of what everyone knows about me, because I was someone before I got to be known by the world as the 13-year-old that stood up against white supremacy and against institutionalized racism. I was someone, right? And for me to have been able to take that one step of bravery, that one act of bravery, there was a person with certain ideas and a person with certain experiences that brought them to that point. So let's write a story to get people to get to know who that person was before the world got to meet them. So Brave Like Me is really about my childhood self and the experiences that my young pre-13-year-old self had that contributed to the act and the step that the 13-year-old me took. And so it's things about, it goes back into my parents, my dad from India, coming from Karmat, my mom from Kwandebele, them meeting, then having me, and my childhood having been bullied severely as a child. Up until I think my teens, I was always someone that was a victim of bullying. Having been bullied, having to find my voice amidst bullying, amidst also dealing with the fact that also now I'm from a family where no one looks like anyone, literally. Racially, we're a blended family. And now it doesn't matter to people as well, the fact that I may be my dad's duplicate looks-wise, but people will always pick up the racial difference immediately. And that will always stand out first. Having to grapple with that as a child, amidst bullying, identity, and then also being a child that was very academic orientated, that excelled academically and wanting to do certain things, being able to excel academically, having certain aspirations and being too shy and too scared to follow those aspirations. And then the journey of me giving my first ever public speaking speech, which was when I was like in primary school, like 7, 8, round about there.
Wow.
So the journey of me getting to actually stand in front of people and give my first ever speech, and how that led me to the bravery I found to be able to give my first ever speech, led me to becoming an activist, giving many speeches around the world, and that whole journey. And it's also about my dad and I. It's
really interesting to hear that, because many South Africans, of course, know you for your track record of activism, which is coming up to nearly 10 years now. And it's amazing to think 2016 is nearly 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But we don't know that backstory of who the person was that brought us that moment that was such a moment of national reckoning when you challenged hair policies at your old school Pretoria Girls, and you captured the imagination along with others of systemic racism in things like hair policy, but that was also a symbol for deeper forms of racism that went beyond these policies but were just about our society as well. And yeah, tell us about like some of the experiences that you share in the book that you think were key to the person that you have become.
So firstly, I talk about my best friend, the person that was very key to me being who I am today, which is my father. And that took a lot. I never thought, I don't even think my 15, 16-year-old self who had witnessed their dad die in front of them and had witnessed it coming for a long period of time. Because sometimes when someone is really ill, you can actually see it. And I think with them as well, they start making peace with death. You know, they start giving you talks like, I love you so much, you're going to be okay. They start making peace with death. So I never thought that I would come this far one day where I'd be able to talk about my dad and even talk about my dad to a point where I've written a book where my dad is going to live on forever through my book, and everyone is going to get to know my dad through me. And it was very important to talk about my dad because I wouldn't be who I am without my dad. My dad was really an important figure before I got to know of Dr. Angela Davis, your dad. Many people I look up to. I had my dad, and that was my first ever role model. That was the man that taught me how to be brave, how to not cower in the face of injustice. That was the man that contributed to me being able to go back to an environment which I, as a child, was sort of petrified of, because no one asks themselves how it feels to blow up globally in the public eye as a 13-year-old for standing up against institutionalized racism and then having to go back to that environment. I was petrified, right? I was petrified to the core because of many things that happened in that environment post the media leaving. I was petrified. It was daunting. I think for now, it's the scariest thing I've ever done, right? Having to go back to that environment and having to face perpetrators of brutal racism and there having been no accountability and having to go back to face the person. I was petrified, and my dad was the person that motivated me to go back, the person that made sure that I go back, and I don't just go back just for the sake of going back. I go back, I live boldly, I wear my hair as it is, I go back without any shame because I've done nothing wrong and everything I've done has not been in vain, and I go back and I ensure that I academically excel. I ensure that I sort of apply salt on the wound by ensuring that I go back and I do well. I go back and I do well outside of that environment. I continue with my activism. I do well. The world gets to know me. I get to contribute to really great things around changing the world. And whilst I'm doing that, I ensure that I matriculate in record time and I excel whilst doing that. My dad was the reason why I was able to achieve that. So it was important for, as I talk about the young little Zulaikha that contributed to 13-year-old Zulaikha being able to be brave and use their voice, I talk about the person who made Zulaikha actually believe that she has a voice, and she has a voice that has something important to say. So yeah, my dad is in it, and it's also really great because it gives people representation that I don't think has ever been seen in children's literature. You get the best of both worlds. You get an amazing Indian character in the book, representation for the Indian kids. You get a great Muslim character, a woman with the hijab who is my paternal grandmother in the book, representation for the Muslim kids. You get my mother, representation. It's really also a celebration and tribute to my identity and the bloodline of people I come from, because I come from a bloodline of people that did not cower, people that were brave. My parents' relationship and marriage was misunderstood for many years. For many years, my mother was asked, why did you marry an Indian man? Why? You know, and even in the community that she's from, in the village that she's from, an interracial marriage was a very odd thing. There had never been exposure to an interracial marriage. In the entire community, my mother was the first person to marry outside of her race. Wow. People came to my parents' wedding not only as guests, because it was a wedding at home, but people also came to see. They were like, we want to see. We've never seen this before. We want to see. So it was the first time that was done. And they had to be brave in order for them to get to a point where they stand by their love and admiration for each other and tie the knot and get married and actually build a family and build a blended family, right? That took bravery. And then the bloodline and ancestry of women and people I come from are people that have had to be brave. My dad had to be brave for him to have been a man in his 20s who left India to immigrate to South Africa, because he left India because of the community he came from was too conservative. He wasn't able to access a formal education. My dad had to be brave. My dad had to be brave to contribute to the anti-apartheid struggle for liberation. You know, as a child, I listened to his stories of exile, right? He had to be brave for that. And to have been a man who didn't go to secondary school, didn't go to university, to have been able to raise a person like me, to have been able to raise a 2-time published author and counting, because there will be more books coming, to have been able to raise a person like me without formal education is an act of bravery, and it shows the type of person he was. To have been able to even excel as an entrepreneur, right, shows the type of person he was. So it's a tribute to that, and it's a tribute to present fatherhood and what present fatherhood can do for one. I would not be the Zulaikha Patel that everyone knows if I didn't have a present father. And I have to talk about that. My dad was the most compassionate, empathetic, kindest person I've ever met before. My values in my activism come from my dad. My values of empathy, my values of compassion, my values of we can change the world, but we're not going to go anywhere if we don't have compassion. And we're losing compassion in society. My values around those, my dad taught me those, you know, and I had to talk about that. I had to.
It's nice what you say as well about the representation of a family that's as diverse as yours. It makes me happy, because growing up, I never felt like I could read a book where I was like, there's a character that's like me.
Yes. And a family that's like yours.
Exactly. The funniest thing happened, like, I read Trevor Noah's book because I was interested in his mixed race identity in South Africa, and I identified with it. And I was in Oxford at that time, so I was in my mid-20s. And I remember reading the book and being like, I've never had this feeling where I identify with, this must be what reading a book is like for like other people, where they identify with the character and they're like, oh, that person's like me and their family's kind of like me. And it took me till my mid-20s to find some work of, or some book where I was like, I fully identify. And talk us through, because obviously it's a theme that's weaved within this children's book.
Oh yeah.
Your relationship with mixed race identity and the ups and downs, because we hardly ever get to talk about these things because we don't have other mixed race people that we can talk to about them.
I've been here twice. You've never said, let's talk about this.
This is so true. You actually raised it, and I was like, why have we not spoken about this?
Yeah, so my journey is I don't have the glamorous journey of my family is Mandela's dream. My family is the vision Mandela had when he was in his cell in Robben Island. My family is not like that at all, right? I never got to live that dream of, yes, my dad is Indian. Yes, my mother is Ndebele. And together we are a blended family. No, I never got to live that. A huge chunk of my mental health challenges came from that in my life, right? Because number one, my first experience of racism was I was overtly hated and despised by my Indian family. I never got to meet everyone because they are in India. So I never got to meet everyone. But the few individuals that came to South Africa and I got to meet them, the experience was horrid. It was terrible. It was really bad. Like, I remember as a child having to make peace with the fact that it's okay for me to only be loved by my dad and my paternal grandmother.
Sure.
But then again, my paternal grandmother and I had a language barrier, right? She spoke no English at all. I never learned my dad's home language, which is Gujarati. I never learned it. So at the same time, there's somebody that loves me there, but
yeah, you can't speak to them.
We can speak, but somebody is going to have to be on the line to translate. And then there's the broken telephone. So somebody loves me, but can't really communicate that to me. Yeah. And I think in that, I also learned that love transcends any barriers as well, right? And so I had to, as a child, make peace with the fact that it's okay for me to only be loved by my dad and my paternal grandmother. The others despise me. And not for any reason beyond the fact that there's blackness that exists in me. And I was denied by them, right? I was denied by them and made fun of, ridiculed, bullied, sidelined, made to feel like I'm not good enough, made to feel like my dad should have made better decisions according to them. He was supposed to find himself a Muslim woman in India and marry her, and they were supposed to arrange the marriage and happily ever after, right? Not him come to South Africa, find a Ndebele Christian woman with African spirituality beliefs as well, and then build an interfaith and an interracial family, right? So it was always like I was made to feel like your dad should regret his decisions. You're one of your dad's not so great decisions. That's how I was made to feel. And growing up, right, I never had like individuals from my paternal family present. I just had my dad. And then I also had to get to a point where my dad had to have an understanding that you also can't take me in Indian spaces because that's where the bullying is. He had to also understand that beyond racism between white and black, white and person of color, there's anti-blackness in Indian communities that exists. People despised me whenever I went to an area which was predominantly Indian, like your Lodiums. Yeah, Lodium, because I grew up in Pretoria and it was in Pretoria. People despised me because of the blackness that exists in me. As a child, I had to even give my parents pep talks. So as a child, I matured extremely fast beyond my years because of the experience that I was living. I had to give my parents pep talks and actually say to my dad, look, sir, we look alike, hey? I look like you, like personality. Listen, you got your dream child that looks like you, personality, but in the eyes of the outside world, we are not the same. And you need to be aware of that. We are racially different, and therefore we're going to be treated differently. Right? And you need to be conscious of that when you take me to spaces with other people that look like you, because they're going to ridicule me, sideline me, and ostracize me, which was my experience, which is why I'm very vocal and happy to talk about, listen, as we talk about racism interventions in this country, we need to talk about anti-blackness that exists in predominantly Indian communities, Lothian, Chatsworth, Phoenix. We need to talk about those communities and the anti-blackness that exists there, and the abuse of Black domestic workers there, Black gardeners, Black people that enter the households through working, right? We need to talk about the abuse that happens in those communities. And I'm talking about it, having seen it, having lived it. And then now on my maternal side. Yeah. So now we've left the controversial side of things, like the racist paternal family. That's what everyone always expects, that the paternal family, that's the non-Black family, is always going to be the racist family. Now, moving on to the maternal family. I had challenges there to date as well. I have challenges there to date. So with my maternal family, there's never been any exposure to people marrying outside of their race, a religion like Islam being practiced. There's never been exposure to, okay, when people marry into another racial group and then you have a child, the child is mixed race and, you know, there's their own identity. There's never been that exposure. So I've always bared the burden of difference and somewhat been ill-treated because of bearing the burden of difference. And bearing the burden of, but yeah, you don't really either way look like us, hey? Your hair coils softly. Yes, it does coil, but it coils softly, right? Or being seen as more privileged, right? Which, yes, colorism exists in our society, which I'll never take away from that. But we have to talk about, sometimes there's a certain level of toxicity that can be perpetuated in a family where there's a mixed race person and they're ill-treated because of their difference. In the side where they expect to be welcomed, where they expect to be treated with a certain level of understanding. Because at the end of the day, when we go out into society, there's no longer a difference. I'm meant to fit in more here because when I go out into society, which was my experience as a child when I basically met white people for the first time through schooling, there was no such thing as, hey girl, your father's Indian, your mother's Ndebele, and everything. There was no such thing as that. It was, you are Black. You are going to be treated as a Black person. You're going to live the Black experience and everything that comes with it, right? Which was my schooling experience from primary to high school, which the high school experience, that's the one everyone knows about. There was no difference there. But in my maternal family, I bared the burden of difference, bared the burden of being the family member that is questioned at gatherings. Like, oh, who's that? The light-skinned one. Are they related to us? Or, for example, like, if you watch and you speak in Ndebele, you know that a white person in isiNdebele is referred to as Ikuwa. And then I'd go to family gatherings on my maternal side, like funerals, weddings, and then the extended maternal side would come and would ask my mom, how? Zabe wafika nekuwa? Like, oh, you arrived with a white person. She's like, no, it's not a white person. She's mixed race. She's not white. They're like, no, but umhlophe. And then I'd sort of be marked and I'd never really fit in as well, right? And then I'd always have to explain my identity as well. And then it didn't also help that now I'm practicing a religion that nobody is used to on my maternal side. And now I have to explain that as well. I have to explain things like, yes, I only eat halal meat. Yes, I don't eat oink oink, but beyond oink oink, I don't eat just any beef. It has to be halal. And you have to explain what's halal, right? And then you have to explain that. And then
now the family is slaughtering, but then there's a halal situation.
Yeah, now you're slaughtering. And then like, now I'm not eating. And then when I'm not eating, now I get bullied because, oh, you think you're better. You're behaving and separating yourself from everyone else. You think you're better, right? So I've bared that burden. And then I also don't have siblings that I share both parents with biologically, right? And I'm not one that makes a fuss about biology, right? I'm not one that makes a fuss about biology, but I don't also have another mixed race sibling.
So do you have siblings on your father's side and your mother's side?
I have a sibling on my dad's side.
Okay.
I have a much older brother that I think is in his mid-40s or somewhere there. And he's fully Indian, but his mom is Hindu. So I don't think my dad has ever been into his own people in his community. Then I have a sister as well, from my mom's side.
From your mom's side. Okay, so you've got Indian siblings, you've got
an Indian
black
sibling,
siblings,
and then a fully black sibling. And then I didn't grow up with the Indian sibling, right? The sibling I grew up with is the one from my maternal side. And now as siblings, we've had to navigate being sisters and everybody going, is this really your sister? But you guys don't look alike. And every time we go somewhere, people think we're friends and not sisters. Every time we're like, yes, we're sisters, everyone's like, how did that happen? Because, you know, and then you just see the confusion, and then it's like people want to say, but you are black, and the other one looks, and some people are brave enough to actually say it to you, and they're like, okay, so if this is your sister, why does the sister look colored-ish, and then she's light in complexion, and then now you look like this, and then also now having to experience that with my sister has also been quite the journey, which then goes back to the not fitting in as well on the maternal side. Was, you know, questions like that can be hurtful to someone, because then you have to also then again reason and say, he's my dad, but he's not by blood my dad, but he's my dad, you know? And then you now have to explain things, and it can be, there's a certain level of humiliation that comes with that, which is why I've always sympathized with kids where one parent remarries and then they happen to have a really, really good relationship with what is termed and deemed as the step parent. Because I think love transcends beyond biology, right? So somebody can love you and not be your biological father. And that should not take away from them being your father. And there's a humiliation that comes in now having to explain, actually, let me tell you why.
Yeah.
You know, and then having to have now been the person that now has to carry the burden of there's humiliation that's going to come from that. And so I carry that burden, you know. For a very tiny person, I'm carrying a lot of burdens in life. But I had to carry that burden. I had to always be the one that comforts her. I had to always be the one that gets blamed, you know, when we go out into social settings, you know. If this happens and it hurts her, I had to be the one that carries the burden of being blamed. And so I never really got the chance to fit in anywhere. And it was hard. It's still hard. But it was hard. And then I think my worst experience of really feeling like, wow, this really had to happen to me just because two people who don't look the same, come from different backgrounds, happen to love each other and marry each other. This really had to happen to me. I remember my dad's funeral. So my dad was very ill. And then as he was ill, my paternal family was now getting involved after not being involved for so long, right? They're now getting involved, and they were getting involved from a place of trying to bring themselves forth to take over my dad's assets or whatever, you know, and then come with the excuse of, no, but your dad doesn't have a son right here, right now. So as the nephew, I have to lead, you know, and not taking account for the fact that my dad has a living child, right? That is essentially his heir or, you know, anything of that nature. And then, yes, so my dad gets sick and then it deteriorates and deteriorates and deteriorates to a point where, yeah, now it's time, as we all belong to God, we return to God. He passes. And my dad's final wish was, as much as he has accustomed himself to South African culture, Black culture, his dying wish was to be buried the Muslim way. So he passed in the wee hours of the morning, so he had to be buried that same day. And now, cool, this is happening now when my parents are also separated. And now then the politics of that comes in, because now sometimes in the Muslim community, we don't talk about it. People that where the marriages don't work out get shunned, right?
Sure.
And then I have to go with my mother and my sister to the hospital to go make sure it is my dad. You know, when they give you that call, hey, so-and-so is no more, come. So now I have to go. And now, before me even making peace with the fact that, oh my God, my best friend is gone, like my dad just died. Before me even making peace with that, the most daunting thing was I'm walking into a hospital where we're going to walk in and then the first thing is they're going to be like, so the both of you are his daughters. You're both his. So I'm dealing with the anxiety of that. So now in the car ride going there, before I make peace with, I have to grieve. I'm a grieving daughter now. I'm getting anxious at the fact that the first thing that's going to happen there is, are you both his daughters? Right? And then also the question of my mother and the question of, are we actually, as the three Black people coming, are we actually the family of the deceased? Cool. We get there. As predicted, it does happen, right? Then my mom does the explaining because she's trying to let me cry about it. And the tears are not coming on my end. I'm just like staring and I'm like, for me, it was the first time I had ever encountered or faced death. So now I'm just trying to process. And I'm also really, really young. I'm still a child. I'm like now staring at, okay, my dad's lifeless body and I'm trying to process. And then now it's also like time is ticking. He needs to be buried today, tonight. Time is ticking. Can't cry now. Hurry up. We need to get the arrangements. And then my paternal cousin comes from the Patel side. He comes and we're like, you have to send the message to India that my dad is no more. Ooh, the first thing he does, my dad's Black ex-wife killed him. Damage control now. Damage control. And then it's also like damage control. Guys, did you not know he was going to get cholesterol? You've been feeding him geese his whole entire life. Did you not know that it causes cholesterol? Now it needs to do damage control. Right? Then now he comes and then he's like, okay, you sidelined. I'm the son. And I'm like, no, sir, you're not the son. It's like, I'm the son. His son is not here. I'm the son. I'm going to run everything. Gonna run everything. Okay, I wasn't involved in the process. I wasn't involved in the process to a point where I didn't even get to say, but my dad needs to leave from his house on the way to the cemetery. I didn't even get the opportunity to pick the cemetery, right? If it was according to them, they wanted to bury my dad in India. But that can't happen because I am his living child who is in South Africa. You can't do that. And then he ran with all the funeral preps, right? And then luckily he lived in Lodium, so cool. My dad got buried in Lodium. And then he plans the funeral and it's happening at his house. And then he just tells me, oh, you can arrive at 3:30 at my house. That was the first time I've ever felt like, wow, I'm excluded because of the Blackness that exists in me. Because two people decided to love each other and they're of different races. And then he's like, you can arrive at 3:30 at my house. And then I get there at 3:30. His house is here. And that's where the final prayers and the actual funeral is taking place. And where my dad is and the last few moments with him before burial is. I was like, no, I've arranged for you to sit 2 houses away with your family, right? It's not our family or my dad's family. My maternal family is your family. So now, because for them, they don't want to be associated with the black family must not sit in the house where the funeral is happening, must sit 2 houses away. Only when my dad is being prepared to be taken for burial, I'm then called, come and see your father. And then as I come, I'm dealing with I'm going to be brutally stared at, head to toe, stared at. And you know when you are in a room where you can actually feel people's eyes staring at you and you can feel the discomfort of behind you, people are whispering. Everyone was like, is this really his daughter? What's going on? Is the other one his daughter? And that's now daunting. And then after that, my dad was buried. And then 2 days later, the death certificate was issued by the mosque. And going to collect it was another humiliating experience where I got to the mosque where it had to be collected. And then the imam was already there with my cousin from my paternal side, and he was preparing to give the original copy of the death certificate to my cousin. And I was like, no, I need to take the death certificate. I'm his daughter. And then he looked at me for a long time, confused, like, you're his daughter. And now I'm like, yeah, I need to not do the explaining again. So I'm his daughter and we are both his daughters, right? And this is his next of kin, his ex-wife, but still listed as his next of kin. So we need to take the death certificate. No, my paternal cousin told the imam, my dad has never been married. My dad has never had any children. And then I had to prove, like, okay, these are my pictures as an infant. Was this a random man kissing a random baby's forehead? Here are the wedding pictures. Here's the same guy that told you he's never been married. Here's the picture of him attending the wedding. Can I please have the death certificate? This is beyond measure humiliating. And also, here's my ID. Did I just pick up the surname Patel? Did I go to Home Affairs and say, hi, what surnames are available? Can I get one? And can I get an Indian one specifically? Can I please get the death certificate? So that was extremely humiliating. And I think after that, I was never really able to, I don't know, come to terms with the fact that this is what my life is going to be like, because I'm a child that was born from a marriage of 2 individuals that are different from each other.
Fam, before we get back to the episode, we just want to let you know we have a big goal on this channel to build this community to 1,000 members. That means we have 2 new levels of SMWX membership. The first level gives you exclusive access to content, discounts on merch, but the second level, in addition to various other perks, gives you access to me. We're going to have meetups, online sessions. You're going to get discount on our live events. So if you want to deepen your SMWX community experience, help us get to that 1,000 member level. Look forward to seeing you there. Sure. It's such a harrowing story in so many ways, because like you realize that the identity of being different from both sides of your family is with you even in moments of grief. Like
Yes. So, which is why I'm still grieving. I'm still grieving. I only started grieving my dad last year, but my dad passed away in 2018. And also then having to also go back to a Black and Ndebele family to explain that, no, he has to be buried tonight. We're not going to do the thing of we're burying on Saturday. We have the whole week. No, it's today, guys. It's tonight. It has to happen tonight. So yeah, it's It's the story of my life. I never got to live that dream of we are united. I've never been able to fit in on both sides. On the side that everyone predicts, of course, I won't fit in. And then on the side where I'm supposedly supposed to fit in because of racial similarity, I don't fit in on both sides.
Was the book a process of catharsis or healing for you in writing that story in any way?
Yes, it was, because I was never able to talk about grief, which is why in the second episode of me being here, I was crying because I couldn't talk about grief. I couldn't come to terms with grief. I didn't even know what grief actually means, you know, and I also had to process grief in a very somewhat interesting time in my life, where the same person that told me to go back to that environment where I've experienced so much racial, brutal violence, right, is now gone. And I have to now go back to that environment without him. So I have to maneuver being in that environment without him. So I couldn't really necessarily come to terms with grief. And then I think because everyone was so perplexed at the idea of someone being buried on the same day, everybody moved on Wednesday. My dad passed on Monday. Everybody moved on Wednesday, right? I did not move on because this is my one and only father. He's not replaceable. He's gone. I'm here by myself, right? Everybody got to move on Wednesday. It stuck with me. And I couldn't even talk about it. And I couldn't even talk about my dad for the longest time ever without bursting into tears and then wallowing for a good week after that. I couldn't talk about my dad after that. I struggled to even talk about my dad. I had so much anxiety afterwards. I started having problems, much more severe problems with my mental health after that. Depression, anxiety, where I couldn't even understand what was going on, right? And it was hard. And then last year, I started grieving my dad. And because my dad was a really amazing father, everything that I am today is owed to my dad. I would not be who I am if it was not for my dad, if it was not for my dad's teachings, if it wasn't even for him just being there and being compassionate and just being present and loving. I wouldn't be who I am, right? And I actually said, well, the world has to know. And beyond the world needing to know, what's been done can't be undone. My dad lives forever now through a book that I have written. It will forever live as a tribute to my amazing, loving father, Zulaikha's dad, in a book. A man that everyone did not think would be successful or have success in his bloodline lives in a book. It can't be undone. Forever he is in a book. And beyond it being about my dad, it celebrates present fatherhood. I'm really a big advocate for people's dads being present because there's a difference between what you get from your dad and what you get from your mom. Your dad is your disciplinarian outside of your mom being your nurturer. Your dad is your disciplinarian. You learn the discipline of life from your dad, right? The discipline that's going to carry you in life to succeed in adulthood, you learn from your dad. The compassion that comes from your father shapes you in a certain way as a person. And so I had to put that and pen that down so that people are empowered to be there for their kids. And also people see that there are good men out there and there are good dads out there. And we do need to be a little bit kinder to men in this society because we're living in a world that crushes men and crushes men economically, psychologically, and emotionally. And we need to have a little bit more compassion towards men, because men are also sensitive beings that deserve compassion and empathy. And I wanted to show through a book how empathetic and compassionate and kind and loving my dad was, so that in turn, people do understand that men are also beings that can be empathetic and compassionate, and beings that are able to feel, and with that ability to feel are able to love and love deeply. And that should enable us as a society to have a bit of kindness towards men and a bit of kindness towards dads that are trying, right? And it may be a view that people don't like, but it has to be shared. We need to talk about that. People's dads are trying, and they deserve compassion. And especially people's dads of color. I wish my dad lived in a world that cared for his mental health, that cared for him beyond being a provider, that cared about who was he and is his heart okay. I wish he lived in that type of world. And through writing this book, I hope that people like my dad that never got the ability to feel, cry, feel their feelings, never got that chance to have society be kinder to them, even though they're trying really hard. I wish my dad lived in a society that cared for his heart and how is his heart and how are his feelings. You know, I think about it now. My dad didn't go to therapy, not because he was ashamed of going to therapy, but because society was going to shame him and take away from his masculinity if he went to therapy. And I wish he lived in a society that cared for how is his heart, because he had to try hard. He had to ensure that he softens himself enough to raise a girl child and be present for a girl child. He softens himself enough. He had to ensure that he's also a provider. He's a man that never went to secondary school or university, but he had to ensure that he has no choice. He has to be a provider, right? And he also had to live through a society where he's always going to be the villain, no matter what. There's something he didn't do correct. And in the end, if he gets divorced, he's still the villain. And he had to live through that. So I wish he lived in a society that was kinder to his heart. And I hope that through people seeing in the pages of my book, the compassion, my dad's compassion and kindness, which is reflected through my story, people are able to change the narrative in society to be kinder to men that look like my dad, that have my dad's story, black men, men of color, are able to actually understand that these are people who have hearts and we should actually be kinder to their hearts, because there's nothing more hurtful than us looking at the statistic of how many men are depressed, how many men are committing suicide, but we are not taking into account that we are responsible for that. We are the ones that caused that. And so, yeah, I hope that beyond empowering kids, beyond raising a new generation of activists, the Gen Alpha, post-Gen Alpha, your son and his peers.
Yeah.
Beyond raising a new generation of activists, it actually, with adult readers, it looks into their hearts to actually change the narrative. Because I know there's a lot of discourse around absent fatherhood in our country. I hope it changes that. Present fatherhood. And I hope it actually also changes the narrative of people being a bit kinder to men's hearts, because they do hurt. And I've seen it through my dad getting to a point where you're so sick, you're not able to play your provider role anymore. Hurts. Divorces, loss of children, things like that hurt men. And I hope that through people seeing my dad's compassion, they are in turn able to be a bit more compassionate to their fathers, their brothers, and their husbands, their boyfriends, just be compassionate to men. And it's not a view that people will like. I might be a pick-me after this episode, but it's all well.
Well, I certainly look forward to sharing this book with my son, Hakeem. I'm looking forward to reading it. It's in many different languages, which I also love, and which is a really important statement and symbol for literature in South Africa. And that's all we have time for today.
Yes.
But we have had lots of conversations, and we're still going to have many more. But I'd just like to thank you for the work you do, the role model that you are to many people, the books that you have written, and most importantly, for just sharing your views and allowing yourself, as powerful and well-known as you are, to be vulnerable. You know, we get lots of guests on this channel, and many of them put up the facade of confidence and all of that. And you've reminded us that, you know, the human experience is what ultimately binds all of us. And you've shared such important parts of that. And I just want to thank you and elevate you for doing that.
Thank you. It's scary, but yeah, vulnerability is what binds us together. And I've had to learn as well to be vulnerable, because I didn't know how to cry and how to be vulnerable, because I cried once as a 13-year-old, and a picture of me crying was plastered all over the media. And there was an expectation of me to pull myself together. And that impacted me to a point where I only started unlearning it last year. Last year I saw not a psychologist, a psychiatrist for the first time. And I had to learn to be vulnerable. I had to learn that it's okay to be confident. It's okay to be able to give a TED talk, but also be anxious. It's okay to be an activist, but also be on antidepressants. It's okay. So yeah, that's me and vulnerability.
I'm really glad that you went on that journey, and that, number one, you feel like you've been able to grieve your father, but also talk about him, and also talk about your own journeys in mental health and, you know, the steps that you have taken and are taking. Because that's another important realm. I think we might need to have our next conversation, we need to have like that
I think we
full
must
chat.
frame it around the pursuit of social justice and the link with insanity.
Wow.
Yes.
I love it. And also hypervisibility and how that plays into it all.
Hypervisibility and anxiety.
Okay. So we'll see you next week then.
Yeah, I'm coming back again.
No,
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And everyone, you know, make sure you get a copy of Brave Like Me. You now know the important stories that went into this book, and this book hopefully will inspire children and parents for many generations to look inside themselves despite the complexity of their lives and find that inner braveness. So, Zulaikha Patel, thank you once again for joining us on SMWX.
Thank you. And can everybody that's subscribed please make me a bestseller? I can't just be a 2-time published author. I need to be a 2-time best-selling author.
That's going to happen. The SMWX fam doesn't play. Don't worry. You're done. You're done. There's a link in the description, and let's make sure that this rises to the top of the charts. Looking forward to reading it to Hakeem, and see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Like, share, subscribe. Aye.